selling book, Begin With We. The worst advice I ever received during my journey is fake it till you make it. I think it breeds inauthenticity and it doesn't work.
Wow. I love that you did worst advice because so many people give us good advice, but I think we have just as much to learn from bad advice, Kyle. So who gave you that advice? When did you get that in your career?
I mean, I can't point to any one person. I think it's something that we all hear as we're coming of age. Certainly, once we enter the workforce, when we're full of optimism and want to make an impact, but also not really sure what the heck it is that we're doing or where our journey will take us. So that's the go-to advice we've probably all heard at least once in our lives.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely heard that. So how do we spin that around? How do we not fake it till we make it? What's better advice then?
Be you, man. Just be you, warts and all. And if the organization that you're in or the team that you're a part of, your friends, your circle, whatever the interaction that comes your way that tells you that that's not enough, then you need to change that scenario. You got to find a new friend group. You got to find a new job. Whatever the case is, fake it till you make it. Just I think inspires us to be something that we're not, which suppresses our uniqueness. And I think that puts us behind. If we're able to bring who we are to the table, we're much better positioned for success in all aspects of our life.
I agree. I think that's so important. And unfortunately, though, because we've heard fake it till we make it, a lot of people never even figure out who the heck they are. They're like, oh, I need to be this, and that's who they are, and they think that's gonna work. And then one day they wake up and they're like, well, that's not really me. Yeah. But yet they built a 20-year career on being somebody that they're not. So let's give those folks, let's give them a little bit of encouragement, Kyle, because I'll say that it works for me to be me, and it worked for me then once I figured out who I was. But the key was I had to believe in me second. I let somebody else believe in me first. Somebody else said, yep, you're good enough. You're awesome. You can be you. But then I had to believe that person. So what about you, Kyle? Let's encourage these folks. Let's give them some quick, how do they embrace that?
Well, I think you got to do some serious self-reflection. Like you said, you weren't even sure who you were. And I think that's not unusual. And listen, man, I'm 48 years old, and there are days today where I'm not exactly sure who I am. But I know if I stay consistent with the person I want to be and the person I want to be portrayed as, I have a better chance of executing on that design. So for me, it was really about that self-reflection, looking deep within, find out who I want to be and what legacy do I want to leave, right? I mean, how do I want to be remembered? How do I want to be talked about when I'm not around? So I think that self-reflection is the first step in identifying who you are and also kind of evaluating, are you the person who you want to be? Because that self-reflection can be a little painful, a little awkward at times. And I think it points out, areas of opportunity. The challenge is you got to listen. You got to listen to those areas of opportunity and then take action.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And with that, then that action, are these actions consistent with someone who is the person that I want to be? Right on. Are we congruent, right? Are we aligned, whatever the word is that we want to use? Is this someone or that I want to follow, right? We're going to talk about leadership today. And is this congruent with the person that I want to be? That's not faking it. Let's be clear.
That's right.
But we're acting as if we were that person so that our actions line up, not so that we pretend that we're the Bon Diggity. Am I tracking
100%? Well said. Okay. Yes, sir.
All right. Good. Well, let's talk about your awesome book, man. Bestseller and best smeller too. It smells good. So I'm grateful for that.
I paid extra for that.
You must have, man. So 10 principles for building and sustaining a culture of excellence. And it's black and white, which I really love. But tell us,
that was intentional.
Why is it black and white? I know. Tell us, why is it black and white?
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out, Phil. It really was intentional. So the book is based on these 10 principles that I developed when leading an organization of about 15,000 employees. And I'd just taken this new role. This was back in 2017. I'd taken a new role and I knew I wanted to be the leader that I never had. And I felt as if this was an opportunity for me to really spread my wings in terms of really leading a cultural transformation. So I just put some pen to paper the night before I was scheduled to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of my newly inherited organization. And I knew approaching this group with what I was going to do and how I was going to be the next best thing and how I was going to lead this transformation, my goals would be DOA, and therefore our team's destiny would be DOA. So these principles, right? No good. These principles, and Phil, I did this with no pre-planning, man. I was in my hotel room at midnight in Lawrence, Kansas, and I had a PowerPoint that I knew I needed to create for the next morning. And about 2 hours later, I had these 10 sentences. They each start with the word we. And I'm not super creative, so now I have the 10 we's. And so these principles were essentially rules. And by the way, they're still in place today at that organization and so many others that I've worked with since leaving corporate America back in 2019. Long story short, the principles govern how we treat each other behind the curtain. They're our rules of engagement because, man, Phil, as you know, a principle is nothing more than a fundamental truth. It is our series of beliefs. And I just felt so strongly then and do now that when a team or a group of people are aligned around a series of fundamental truths, like we do the right thing, we take action, we challenge each other, those types of things. If we're aligned on that's who we are and that's how we want to be viewed, we're so better positioned for success. So I roll these principles out, and they've kind of been my manifesto of sorts. It initially began as just a work thing. It's how I wanted others to treat me inside the workplace because it was how I was going to treat them. And to get to your question, the reason the book is in black and white, the very first presentation I gave on the 10 We's was in black and white. Every presentation I've given subsequent to that day in Lawrence, Kansas, all in black and white because the principles are not negotiable. There's no gray. Like if you want to be a part of this team and subscribe to these principles, it's not a buffet. You got to take them all or you can't be a part of the team. So that was a subliminal thing that I rolled out early on, and it's just always stuck.
Wow. So you don't get kind of pregnant with these principles. You're either in or you're out.
That's it.
All right.
That's
Good.
it.
Well, let's talk about some of those principles, Kyle, because there's a lot there. The one that resonated with me the most was number 5. We own our mistakes.
Yeah.
We are not judged by our mistakes, but how quickly we remedy them and if we repeat them. So talk to me about that one, because in the book you talk about Baxter, right? Rolling that, owning that kind of, I would call that, eat the shit, right? You make a mistake, you gotta
real
eat
crisis.
Yeah, real crisis, right? And they owned it. They owned it, and they have enough money that they could have just buried it, but they owned it. So tell me about that, and tell me about how you've seen that play and why that's so important.
Yeah, and I don't think my experience on this front is entirely unique. So I spent nearly 30 years in corporate America, and I began in a very, very small cubicle for a regional bank here in Tampa, Florida, and managed to work my way through the labyrinth of the corporate world. And for some context, my last couple of roles collectively, I led more than 30,000 employees at massive organizations. I worked for 3 Fortune 10 organizations, held very senior leadership roles in each of those firms. But there was a common thread that I noticed early on in my career. And that was this gotcha mentality that most bosses, it was their guiding paradigm, if you will. In other words, they were always looking for someone to make a mistake. They were looking for someone to make an error so they could play gotcha and kind of flex and show their authority as the quote unquote boss. But what that does is, and it's no secret, what that does is it stifles creativity, and it tells the workforce, do exactly as you're told, stay in your lane, don't aspire for anything new, certainly don't look for any type of innovation, because when you do, you're going to get more work, number one. But also, anytime we try something new, Phil, right, the odds of us making a mistake go up exponentially, right? And I came to the conclusion, and it took me, probably 20 plus years of my career to realize you want members of your team willing to take a leap of faith. You want them to take risks. You want them to try new things. Why? Because if we're not trying new things, we're mediocre, man. There's someone around the corner that's going to lap us. They're going to be better than us on all fronts because we're so happy with the way we are with the status quo. So I felt like if you want people to take action and you want them to be better, try to be better, take our team to new heights, you've got to be open to and willing to accept mistakes. Be very, very tough on the mistake, but not tough on the person that made the mistake. And I've seen, and since discovering this kind of epiphany for me, dude, I have to tell you that the teams that I have been fortunate enough to work with, they are so quick to raise their hand. And what happens is collectively we address the mistake, we identify the root cause of it, find out how it happened, and we implement stopgaps and QA steps to make sure it never happens again. And everybody's smarter for it. It's our constant sense of improvement that is driving this need to always own our mistakes. You cannot get better unless you acknowledge the mistake has happened.
Yeah. Well, and you can't really move forward until you acknowledge that mistake happened, because otherwise, to your point, it does happen again and again and again. And the people that need to know don't end up knowing. They don't end up learning. So I think that's beautiful. So let's pop to another one here. One that I want to talk more about, because this is one that I'm not as great at as I'd like to be. And that's number 10. We obsess over details. Details matter a lot. So talk to me. Is it all details? Is it just certain details? Is this negotiable at all? Because, I have typos sometimes, Kyle.
Man, like many things in life, this one is entirely situational. So for some additional context, it's the 10th of the 10 We's. And I made it the 10th purposely, because if we lead off with an organization or a team that is aspiring to obsess over details and really strive for excellence, I think there's a lot of housekeeping that must be done before we jump right to obsessing over details. So the first 9 We's are essentially foundational, and the last one is the bow on the present. So it's the icing on the cake. And for me, details are what separates good from great, average from good, and it separates us from our competition, right? So I feel very strongly that when we are really, really diligent and disciplined in everything that we do, for example, someone on the team is tasked with building a presentation that we've got to take to the CEO, or maybe it's going to a client, right? I got to see the exact same font size, the same font style, the same spacing. The colors must be all consistent. I was working with a client the other day who was working on a pitch deck for one of her clients. And she sent me a deck and said, "Hey, man, would you mind giving this a once over? I know you're pretty OCD." By the way, Phil, I acquired the nickname late in my career as the Shredder, because I would get PowerPoints or presentations from people on my team, and I would shred it because I would find issues with it. So anyway, I was working with this client. She put together this presentation, sent it to me, and I had a recommendation for some color changes. No big deal. And she came back to me and said, no, these colors are right. It's the eyedropper color that I used in PowerPoint. It matches my client's color perfectly to the number. And I thought, what a great example of obsessing over details. Here's someone that's putting a pitch deck together for a prospective client, as are other companies who are also pitching for the same line of business. And she went to the painstaking detail to do the little eyedropper thing inside of PowerPoint to make sure that her colors matched the client. Now, you may say that sounds silly, or it's overly burdensome, or it's not a good use of time. But if that comes in and another pitch comes in that's wildly different, maybe it's that vendor's colors instead of the client's colors, I think subliminally or maybe even consciously, that client is going to really gravitate towards the one that had those details taken care of. So it is situational, man, right? Do you want to send an email or take an hour to send an email to a loved one? No. Do you want to take 30 minutes working on a presentation for someone senior in your organization? Yes, probably more. So I think healthy obsession over details is probably a nice thing to add. But the moment we care less about those things that are that we would kind of categorize as small is the moment the competition will see that, seize upon it, and pass us. One quick last little quote on this one, man, that I think was the deal breaker for me when I became so obsessed with details. I read a quote from Charles Eames, an iconic furniture designer. Herman Miller, the Eames chair. There's so much history there. Mid-century architect, designer guy. His quote was, "Details aren't the details. Details make the product." And I think if we look at everything we do, that's not just a detail. These details stack up to be something really, really beautiful. And that's how we should look at everything we do.
All right. You changed my mind. I like that. I
Let's
can buy
go.
that. I think that's good. Yeah, let's go. So with that, I don't know if you noticed, but I recognized that I had the wrong orange on the bottom of the screen. And I just changed it to the correct orange.
Love it.
So here, so I'm gonna change it back. This is the wrong orange. And then as we go here, this is gonna be the right or
My
correct
man.
orange that matches with mine. So I think it's interesting. And I didn't, to your point, I didn't even notice that. So I appreciate that you helped me be more aware of that, because that is important, right? How it
It
looks, that
is.
is
Yeah.
important. So
It's
I
your
think that's,
brand, man.
yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Absolutely.
right. So I appreciate that. So with that, Kyle, there are 8 other ones in there. We're going to talk about 1 or 2 more as we go
Sure.
here, but I just got to know, like, did you have a leader that exemplified these 10? Did you have an example or a mentor or someone who, what, maybe not consciously, because you said
Yeah.
you came up with these,
Yeah.
but unconsciously, like as you look back in the rearview mirror, did you have someone that you could say, oh yeah, that person was all 10?
No, certainly never all 10. Because I am never always all 10. I'm a
Ooh.
flawed human like you, like everybody else, right? The goal is to keep, and that's where I think there's some value to be had in recognizing who we are. And the principles do that. They lay the foundation for how we behave, which makes it easier to call someone out or point out when they're not living it, including me, including the boss. And that was the thing I was really clear to say. And I've always been very overt in saying since then, these are the rules by which we hold each other accountable. And that means me to you and you to me, regardless of title, right? So I think I was fortunate enough to work under some really, well, I would say 2 or 3 really great leaders. As awkward or weird as it might sound, I was also very fortunate to work for and under some really, really bad leaders. Right. And I think I probably learned more from those
Absolutely.
men and women than those that I would say are the great leaders in my
Yeah.
history. You touched on an example that I think is profoundly illustrative of a great leader, and that's the Baxter example, which is in chapter 1 of my book. I consider myself very, very lucky to have been a student in business school of Harry Kramer, who was the CEO of Baxter during this crisis. And for your audience that may not be aware, this is back in the 90s, Baxter Healthcare. They were in the midst of a crisis that they caused. So they make dialysis machines, among many, many other things. And they assembled some products that had some type of residue or something that did not agree with the patients, and it got into their bloodstream. And I think 53 people ultimately was the number that perished. And the example that I include in the book is one of a real tragedy, but the way that Harry Kramer and team owned it, it was inspiring. And it's hard to find inspiration in tragedy that large. But I got to know the man very well and know that that he is someone that I certainly look at Harry Kramer as someone that played a hugely influential role in my journey, especially in the creation of these principles.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Outstanding.
great guy.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. I lived in Milwaukee, and it was a pretty big deal. It was
It
a
was
pretty
a
big
big
deal
deal.
because Baxter was right down the street, right down the highway, so I'm
Yeah,
very familiar with that. So
huge organization too.
yeah.
And like you said, man, it'd be very easy, and we see it all the time, where an executive will go on camera at a press conference or some type of venue, and they're not telling the truth. You have seen for your own eyes that what this person is saying is contrary to reality because you've seen that reality. And that wasn't how Kramer and his team operated. He got in front of it. We blew it after they got the results back from lots of discovery and research. We blew it, owned it. This guy even went to the households of deceased family members. So he would visit family members of those that had passed. I don't think he made out all 53, but I would challenge you to find a similar example where someone that was leading a $12 billion organization went and visited, people that had been so adversely affected by their product. I think it's a really beautiful example.
Yeah. The only organization that does that consistently is the military.
Yeah,
And so
that's true.
it's
Yeah,
it's pretty
good
cool
point.
to see a
Good point.
civilian group do
Yeah.
that. And because it's different in the military.
Yeah.
That they're kind of expecting to put their lives in line.
Right.
Customers are not. Let's be clear, right? Customers are
It's
not
not
like,
usually part
well,
of the
hey,
terms
I
and
bought,
conditions. Right.
right. Yeah. I bought your pickles and you killed me. Thanks,
Yeah.
Kyle. I appreciate that,
Yeah.
man.
It's not in the
So
fine
yeah,
print. No.
no, sir. No, sir. So with that, let's pivot into number 6 here, because I
Yeah.
really think six pairs well with 10, and really with all of these here.
Yeah.
And they all go together well. Let's
They
be
do.
clear. There's not like, oh yeah, I really don't like number 57. No, there's 10 and they all work. So number
Yeah.
6, we pick each other up. The only way to ensure ownership and mistakes is to guarantee an environment of support. A team that's committed to picking each other up allows each person to feel safe, to show up as their authentic self. That's what you said before. Risk boldly, woohoo, engage fully, and this is the big one, I think, feel connected to others on their team. So how do they do that, man? How do they get that connection? And then let's go to the other ones and hit that hard.
Yeah. I think to answer that, Phil, I got to add a little bit of context. So 6 obviously comes after 4 and 5, right?
Yep.
4 is we take action, right? If you want, we talked about this a moment ago. If you want a team to strive for new heights, you got to take action. We jump right into 5, which is we own our mistakes. So if I want someone to take action, I have to be willing and open and be ready to accept those mistakes that come. And when the mistake comes, what do? We have to pick each other up. And I think there are 2 components worth calling out for we number 6. So I think it's incumbent on everyone on the team, when someone else is struggling, even if it's a situation outside of work, someone's going through a divorce, they got a sick child, we all have baggage, right? Someone is coming to work, or more people than one are coming to work with angst, and there's something going on, right? And I think as a human, it's our obligation, especially as a teammate, to pick someone else up. And that is, hey man, you doing all right, Phil? I noticed you were running a little bit late this morning. I care about you. I noticed the quality of something that you typically delivered that's very high is sliding a bit. Can I help? Is there anything I can do? No? Okay, cool. I just wanted to let you know I care, and I'm here for you. Now, part 2 that I think is probably more important but less embraced is it's the leader's obligation to lift people on the team to new heights. So if someone on the team expresses an interest to learn more, they want to be promoted, maybe they even want to leave the team to go take on a bigger or more impactful role, as they categorize such. They want to maybe even leave the organization. I think it's the leader's obligation to help them get there, even if it means leaving our company. Because what happens when the team member sees that the leader really cares about their individual success, and they're not just using them like a AA battery that's stuck in a drawer until I actually need it, the response is so much goodwill is created between that team member and the leader. I had this happen, man. I had it happen where a member of my team approached and said, "Hey, Kyle, I've been approached by another organization. It's a role that I think is really perfect for the next step of my journey. The compensation is incredible, and I've got some interviews lined up week after next." I had forged this type of relationship with this fella, and he felt open. He shared these. We shared these kinds of things. We worked together at 4 organizations, by the way. And I said, "Fantastic, man. How can I help you?" We did mock interviews. I helped with his resume. He was so ready for these interviews. He was going to get this job. He didn't get the job. The company he was interviewing with, they went with an internal candidate, and they told my guy that he wasn't going to be the guy. Disappointed, obviously, but man, how loyal and how much goodwill do you think there was between he and I? Because I wasn't like, think about the flip side of this scenario. How many times, or can you imagine going to your boss and saying, "I'm interviewing for a role outside of the team somewhere else"? The reaction for 99 out of 100 leaders or bosses at that point is, "You're dead to me," right? If you get it, great. If you don't get it, we'll still be here with a pile of work for you. When you take the approach that I mentioned, you create goodwill and you ensure that the team member knows that I'm here for you. I'm not here for me, which I think is the premise of everything that I do today. It's like everything must begin with we, and that's a good example in my mind.
Wow. So that's so interesting that you talk about that, because I'll tell you, some employees, either they don't feel the trust, so they're not going to share that with their boss,
Mm-hmm.
or they get ticked off because there isn't opportunity in the organization.
Yeah.
I had that happen. I had an associate that reported to me that I knew we weren't ever going to promote her. And I was, and I cared enough to say, you know what, we're going to, I'll help you find something somewhere
Good
else
for
even.
you. Yeah.
Well, the problem is though, she freaked out. She went to my boss and my boss was like, well, what are you doing? I said, well, you made it clear to me we're not promoting her. She's like, well, she does a great job for us. Why would you do that? I said, because she matters more than we do. Like, I want her to win, man. And you know what's interesting? Fast forward a year and a half later, because she wouldn't leave. And at the time, I was very sad for her. A year and a half later, we actually promoted her. And she ended up doing a great job for us. Yeah. Yeah. Because she saw, to your point, and not that she verbalized this, but I'm sure she saw that I'm going to give her every opportunity I can to help her succeed, whether or not we can promote her or not, whether or not we could have promoted her or not. And then magically, and I do mean magically, I'm not being facetious here. Magically, we had an opening and we promoted her up. And you know what? She did a great job.
What a great story, man.
Yeah.
What a great, the role that you played in that cannot be overstated. I think that's really, really cool. Now, it's also a kind of a condemnation that the environment of the organization was not open enough, and your boss at the time was like, "What are you doing?" Yeah, it's I love that example. I'm probably going to use that. That's a good one.
There you go. Well, and to that, right? I do think that it is so important that we take the time to be the example for our team. That we just are there, that is, I think that's part of the difference between the boss and the leader, like you talk about in the book, which I thought was very interesting. You drew a Venn diagram in there, the boss and the leader. And you said that the boss is more concerned about I, and the leader is more concerned about we. Now, in the middle of that, though, there's a little bit of overlap. So talk to me about that, Kyle, as we're getting ready to wrap this up here. Talk to me about the boss and the leader and where you kind of came up with that definition, because I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, man. So I think most people would agree there is a canyon of difference between a boss and a leader. And I'll get to the overlap in a second, but the obvious differences in my mind are the boss is one that a boss is a person that is looking to enforce the rules. They want to catch somebody. They want to play gotcha. They want to flex their authority because they can. They are more interested in their own success criteria, their own journey, their own ascension through the corporate world. Whereas a leader understands the real value to be had in any group of people, a team, is when the team is aligned on a core set of principles towards a common set of values, and they are kind of striving to reach an ultimate goal. They're all aligned around each three of those components. The leader's job is quite simple, actually. It's to essentially get out of the way, but I'll be more specific. I think there are two components to most leaders being really, really effective. The first is you got to identify and get out of the way the things that stand in front of the employee's excellence. In other words, some people might require a different work at home situation. Some people might need to come in at 10 a.m. versus 9 a.m. because they have a child they have to get to daycare or school. The things that stand in the way of team members really being excellent and being their best and delivering their best, that's the leader's job. Get those things out of there. Maybe they need more training on something, whatever it is. And the only way to find out what those things are, by the way, is to be in touch with your people. Get those things out of the way. And then number two, the second of two priorities for the leader is inspire and motivate in spite of the things that you can't get out of the way, because you'll never be able to solve everything. It's called work, right? It's not called fun. So there will be things that stand in the way of their excellence that are really just, it is what it is. So we got to recognize those things and still aim to really deliver an excellent product or service, whatever it is that we do. Now, the overlap between the boss and the leader are the things that, maybe the less sexy things that just come with being in a position of leadership, like interviewing, hiring, disciplinary action type things, the annual appraisal, like the compliance things that most organizations have to deal with. I think you'll find those are similarly executed between the boss and the leader. But that's the overlap. And by the way, if you've read the book, the overlap is a slice. There's not a ton of overlap. That's where a person becomes a leader versus the boss. And that's when they deliver on those extra things that really enable success, not stunt success via disciplinary action and playing gotcha when someone falls short on something.
Right on. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, before I ask you the last two questions here, Kyle, I just want to remind folks, hey, get a copy of Begin With We. Go to KyleMcDowellinc.com. He's got the 10 principles up there. He's got a little bit more about the book. I've been through it a couple times. It's an easy, powerful read. So I encourage you, friends, get a copy of that. Go to KyleMcDowellinc.com. So with that, Kyle, there's a lot of principles there. And by a lot, I mean, because they're dense, man. They're powerful, powerful principles. Which one did I not ask you about that you're like, Phil, if people don't get this one right, it's not going to work out?
Love that question. And it's an easy answer for me. It's number 8. We challenge each other. So the context for this one is, I think we've all seen it. In most organizations, challenges come from here to here. They come from high to low. Rarely, if ever, is challenge from peer to peer evangelized and embraced. And almost never is challenge from team to leader the norm. So it was really important to me to create an environment where, look, you gotta recognize as the leader, you don't have all of the best ideas. I don't have a license on all the things that could make our jobs easier or make us more successful and grow our business. I don't have all of those answers. There's one of me, and in my last role, 14,000 of others. Right.
Wow.
So to pretend, right. So to pretend that I have all the answers, that's just arrogance and ego driven. So it was important to me to establish this principle that challenge is the way that we do things. Right now, there are 2 rules, or one rule with kind of 2 filters. If you're going to be in this team or be on this team and you're going to embrace challenge and you want to be part of the team that is really ripe with challenge, the challenge must be grounded in 1 or 2 things: data and or experience. Otherwise, it's your opinion. So for example, Phil, let's say you and I are working together on a new product rollout. We're going to launch something late next month. And you come to me and say, hey, Kyle, at my last company, we had a product rollout very similar to this. And we took this, we took the same approach that you and I are taking. And I have a feeling we're gonna fumble because XYZ, right? That's experience that, Phil, you bring to the table. I damn well better listen to that, right? And what happens when you have a team of people that really know they're allowed to challenge each other diplomatically, must be grounded in data and or experience, you start to see a lot more interaction among the team. I recall vividly, man, when I first rolled these principles out, my staff meetings were not unlike many other staff meetings in corporate America. I sat at the end of the table. My team sat around the table, and each person would go through their updates. While one person was speaking, everyone else at the table was either down on their phone like this, or they were in their laptop. They weren't paying attention, because typically that part of the staff meeting is always one-to-one, readout, listener. But when the rest of the team is not only encouraged, but obligated to participate, including challenges, they'll hear things out in the workforce with their teams, but they come to the staff meeting, someone else is talking about a topic that, they may have some familiarity. They are now obligated to chime in and say, hang on, that doesn't quite make sense. I remember talking to so-and-so, I read this report, and what you're saying doesn't quite make sense. So then you get back and forth. And out of this back and forth comes sometimes debate, sometimes conflict. But at the end of that, we're better because we have the answer. It's not one person's readout. It is multiple people who have a lot of intelligence, a lot of experience, and a lot of care come to a common answer or a common understanding of what that topic is. It's really beautiful to watch, man.
Wow.
It's my favorite.
That sounds awesome.
Thank you.
Sounds like an organization that we all want to work in, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I listen, you can take my word for it, but I've heard from hundreds of people in that organization and thousands of people since then, since I wrote the book, that say it's so simple. These principles are so very simple, but when you make the commitment to live them as a team, and you conspicuously evangelize them every single day, they're not just words on a wall, you will find greater fulfillment and have a greater impact than you probably ever thought possible. And the last thing I'll add, man, it was totally unintended and it was a beautiful byproduct for me. I found myself living these principles in my day-to-day work life, But I also realized at one point I was not the same person outside of the workplace. I didn't hold myself accountable to those same principles. And I thought, what a hypocrite. No one's going to follow me. No one is going to be on my team and follow me if they realize I am two different people, one inside of work and one outside of work, which led to a transition and transformation for me that I think I'm more disciplined. I keep my word more than I ever have before. And I feel like the legacy that I leave, both professionally and personally, is better off because of these principles.
Awesome. That's really cool.
Thanks, man.
That is really cool. So, all right, Kyle, last question for you, man. How do we get started with this? How do we get started along this journey of beginning with we? Because here's the thing, man. I mean, you got 10 great principles here. They're all great. But I want to start, man. And I don't know that tomorrow, this month, maybe even this quarter, that I can implement all 10. So how do I start in my organization with my team?
Like everything else, man, you have to embrace the challenge, right? Also one of the principles. And that is it takes, for me, it took being in a quiet hotel room at midnight. I don't think many of us take the time to do this type of self-reflection to say, who do I want to be? What do I want to be known for? How do I want to be viewed? What's my leadership legacy, or what's my human legacy? And then from there, develop your own principles. For me, it happens to be these 10. And I think they are the 10 that can change your life, not just professionally, but personally. I've seen it, but they don't have to be yours, right? You can create your own principles. But I think the sooner you identify those things that you want to be known for and kind of your rules of the road, morally speaking, and even ethically speaking, identify those, live them over and over and over and over again. And you'll start to realize the moments in life when you strayed and you didn't live them. And the more that happens, the more the magnetism of those principles will pull you back in. Long way of saying you got to find some quiet time. Look in the mirror. There's this concept I introduced in the book called the mirror of truth. It doesn't have to be a real mirror. It's any kind of outlet. It could be a confidant, someone that you know will give you the truth, not someone that just tells you what you want to hear, not a yes person. But take that time. Who am I? What do I want to be known for? Am I living it? And what's the gap in between? And work day every day to bridge that gap. But give yourself latitude, man. I didn't live these principles every single day, and I still stray from time to time. That's because I'm human. The first setback does not mean we give up, though. We got to embrace that challenge, but you got to make the choice to do so, man.
Yeah, right on, man. So embrace the challenge, friends. Figure it out for you. What matters to you? So with that, I'm going to encourage folks, get a copy of Begin With We. Get to know Kyle more. Go to KyleMcDowellInc.com. You can get a copy of his book. You can learn his principles. And then get started. Embrace the challenge. And as Kyle mentioned there in the close, give yourself some grace. You're not going to be successful 100% the first time. Don't give up. Keep it up. You're worth it. Your team is worth it. This transformation is worth it. Kyle, you're worth it, man. Thanks so much for being here, brother.
Hey,
I appreciate you very
much. What
much.
a treat. I'm so happy to join you today. Appreciate you.